This time of year, I like to pick stuff that you don't have to pick this time of year, but it's just that the rest of the year there's other stuff to pick, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So stuff like uva ursi,
Right.
for example.
Yeah.
But still on the kidney talk, juniper berries as well.
Right.
And again, I'm only picking, it's not the right time of year, it's just something to do at this time of year.
Right.
You know, in the summer, we've got all this other stuff to pick. Right?
Welcome to the Light Cellar podcast, brought to you by Light Cellar, a place where you can learn to find and craft your own food and medicine. In this interview series, you will meet a range of characters in the health and wellness space that are bringing light to your everyday. You'll hear from a number of different experts on a wide variety of topics. We have several different series within the podcast, including our Wild Wisdom and Storytelling with Blaine Andrusek, the Rays of Light, inspiring wellness in the community, plus solo casts, Q&As, and other topics for you to enjoy. You can find this as a video version, as well as the audio on any of your favorite platforms. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this with somebody you know who will benefit. You can also shop online at lightcellar.ca.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. This is another episode of Wild Wisdom and Herbal Storytelling with Herbal Elder Blaine Andrusek. Haha, there he is. Yes, you got the beard and the white to...
I've never had a beard in my life.
Really?
No, I think I've had a mustache ever since I could grow one.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I used to quit shaving sometimes on canoe trips, so I'd come back with a little bit of a goatee. But
Right.
yeah, I'd never had a beard. But when I got to the hospital, I thought, well, I'm not going to have any big dates or job interviews coming up, so maybe I'll just let it grow and see what it does. And
Yeah.
it was getting a little bit too ZZ Topish, so one of the nurses trimmed it off for me, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I think for now I'm just going to keep it.
Yeah. Well, really, you're really embodying your herbal
This
elder.
whole elder thing.
Yeah, and there is actually one job interview that you could go for that would help you in the process. So a Santa at the mall.
Ho, 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 ho.
You'd be
I
perfect.
used to actually do Santa for quite a few years
What?
when I was in my 20s, and my hair must have been longish then.
Yeah.
And a couple of the girls I knew from school would set it in rollers. And then there was this stuff you could buy at the drugstore called Streaks and Tips. It was for having highlights for a short period.
Right.
And it came in silver and gold and white. And we discovered that if you used the silver first as a primer, the white worked really well. And so it was kind of fun because I'd get these kids that were just at that age where they realized Santa was a hoax.
Right.
And they were going to pull my wig off.
Yeah.
And it didn't come off. And they'd look closer and be like, oh my God, this is his real hair. Oh, we are in big trouble here.
Yeah.
This is the real Santa. But yes, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, I remember you've always had that very smooth shaven face, and I always tell people, Blaine uses rose hydrosol on his face every day, and that's,
Every day.
Yeah, and that's really what's kept your skin so amazing.
It's the first thing to do. Calgary tap water most months of the year comes in at about 8.2, I think, which is quite alkaline.
Right.
And when you add that to just about any sort of what people call soap,
Right.
it's even more alkaline. And I think people don't quite realize, we used to, I worked in the wholesale end of the beauty industry for about 16 years, and we used to occasionally, for hair shows, do crazy things like, if you took Head and Shoulders shampoo, for example, and urine, you had bleach. You got bleach.
Really?
It's alkaline enough, and we would do highlights at hair shows,
Right.
showing how it worked with, and this would turn things around to nappy rash,
Yeah.
right? Because there's a lot of nitrogen in urine.
Yeah.
Anyway, and that mix, so many people use like even baby shampoo was made by Johnson's and Johnson's, assuming that the mothers of America were too inept to be able to bathe a child.
Yeah.
So the whole coating on our skin and hair has what we call the acid mantle.
Yeah.
It's part of your immune system. And so just using you're actually allergic to tap water, which is why if you lay in a bathtub for too long, you go up about 3 dress sizes. And that's why you get all wrinkly, right? And so bubble bath is evil. And even, so back to baby shampoo, it was made to, what's their slogan? No more tears.
Right.
Because they balanced the shampoo to your eyes. How does this work? So that it wouldn't irritate the eyes, but when you combine it with urine, it forms bleach somehow. Anyway, we were doing highlights on people with brown hair and making blonde highlights with pee. And
where would you get the pee? Who would?
Well, I don't know. Somebody just go pee in a bucket, I guess. And the only embarrassing thing was that it actually worked better than the highlight product we were selling at the time.
Wow.
So
I have heard this, that like urine is one of the key ingredients in a lot of beauty products, like urea, like a source urea, this type of thing.
Yeah.
And that, I do know people personally who use their own urine topically as well as internally.
So I'm just trying to get this straight on the acid mantle thing. Your own excretions are a mixture of sweat and oil, and that's what forms the so-called acid mantle. Mm-hmm. So ironically, when you go wash your hands with a typical soap product, you're removing your acid mantle, and you're more apt to carry bacteria,
right?
Because you washed your hands.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to babies. The thing that we must do when you get somebody out of the baby bath is reduce that alkalinity with something that's acidic, and that's why what you should use is any hydrosol.
Right.
Okay, because nobody really, do you rinse the baby further? You've had them in bubble baths type stuff, and then you sort of pat them down with a towel.
Yeah.
And that's a prime time to use something acidic, and all hydrosols are acidic. I think that's the gamut, just to get us back to what's called the acid mantle.
Yeah.
Am I making any sense?
No, totally. And when I got into making hydrosols, one of the things you can do as a maker is test the pH, just to kind of make sure you've got a good product, and that's what distinguishes it from just tap water, filtered water with essential oils put in it. Like that's not what a hydrosol is. They have this.
And that's why they don't need any preservatives.
Right. Yeah.
Until they really slowly oxidize. But
but
they're good for a couple of years, and then.
Oh, absolutely.
I've seen, there was a time when, what was her name? Katie, somebody that did a whole book on hydrosols.
That's right.
She was from Toronto.
Yeah, Suzanne Katie or
That's
Katie.
it.
Yeah.
Following her presence, Ray Dunphy had brought her to town for a workshop.
Oh, amazing.
And so Ray started stocking a whole bunch of new hydrosols, like rosemary and things she'd never had before.
Yeah.
And it took, they didn't have, like rosewater in my life seems to last forever.
Right.
But some of the imports she brought in, like, again, rosemary was one of them. After so many months, it would start getting a bit of mold on the tube.
Oh, yeah,
the sprayer.
Yeah. Right.
She ended up trashing some of them.
Yeah. And that must have been due just to contamination, I would say, more likely than that they went off.
Well, it was something that came up when we were in France, that
right.
people in the field, like they'd be washing their hands as they were making the hydrosols and things. So the feeling, that came up, that it was just contamination from.
But yeah, otherwise, dark bottle, typically sealed up, so it's away from oxygen, it's away from like direct sunlight. I've had some hydrosol bottles, like years and years, and they're still perfectly good.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just have a natural kind of preservativeness to them from the acidity, and also a lot of the plant, antimicrobial nature and properties.
Right.
So yeah, that's a great book. Suzanne Caddy, Hydrosols, The Next Aromatherapy. And I've got that book. I think we've been selling it at the shop. We just have one left currently. But it's neat to go through and read about all the properties of the different plants. And she's got a pH for each one of them, the range that it's going to be in. Did you attend that workshop when that happened? Okay, amazing.
I think Suzanne was probably one of many. It kind of got out into the speaker's world that if you're ever doing a workshop in Calgary, you wanted to meet Blaine and get invited for a home-cooked dinner.
Oh, yeah.
And the bonus for me was that what people sometimes say when they're being videotaped and what they might say after a good meal and a little too much wine were sometimes different.
For sure.
And I'd learn a lot at my home-cooked meals.
Yeah.
So.
No, you were definitely famous for hosting and cooking, whether it was, Wild Rose students or somebody coming in from out of town as a speaker, that's for sure. Or all the parties, all the stories you've told me about that you used to host at your place.
Now it's long ago and far away.
Yeah.
I'm alone in a home.
Life.
But one step at a time. I've got friends that are taking me out for meals once in a while, and I'm not in a lockdown situation anymore. I can come and go as I please and sign out. And some weeks ago, I didn't realize how late it was getting. I had a former student who, not in a love way, like the usual sense of the word, but I was one of her favorite instructors, and so she loves me. I get all these pink Post-it notes and things, and she said, no, it's not like that. I'm engaged. No, don't go that way. I love your brain, not the rest of you. But she's been very helpful with getting me out.
Yeah.
In fact, that's who drove me to my EEG yesterday.
Right. Yeah.
And her father, who's a hunter, had heard so many stories from his daughter that he was anxious to meet me, and so they had me over for dinner. Anyway, the point is, I had no idea it was getting so late, and the home was really concerned, and apparently we're a whisper away from calling the police. I don't know what they were going to say, like a missing Ukrainian with a beard. I don't know how that was going to go, but anyway, we have the agreement now that if I know I'm going to be any later than 8:30 or 9 o'clock, I just phone in and say everything's fine, and I'll be another 2 hours or whatever.
Yeah. Well, we were just talking on the way over about how, like maybe it's not so unsurprising because these are people kind of in the health care industry. You've had various nurses and doctors, some who recognize you, and I would say almost all who have recognized the knowledge that you have and have sought that out. And though they might be kind of in the modern, pharma world, maybe for work as a career, like personally, their interests are in natural.
They for themselves or their kids.
Yeah.
A lot of people that work in standard practice realize that not everything that they do is all of that smarter, healthier, fitting. And also realize that we're the only place in the world that as synthetics came, we ditched the herbs.
Right.
In countries like China and Germany, they would use very often the new synthetics to spike the herbs to make them work a little more powerfully, like for sleeping aids and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that it's been sort of a peak. For some reason, I'm thinking, I don't know, I might be completely off base here. Just 1987 popped into my brain. Was sort of the peak year where we had gone more into synthetics, and then since then started going back into herbs.
Right.
And that's when a lot of drugstores started expanding to bring more herbs in because their customers were asking for them.
Right. Yeah, it's true. And it's actually a very common model now. Like in
Yeah.
Cochrane, they're described as two pharmacy. You know, it's like they got the synthetics, the pharmacy side, and then right next to it, you know, the natural. And there's another one in downtown Calgary. There's quite a few now that are embracing that model, and it's nice to see because, I mean, it goes back a long time, but probably most especially through the 1900s, that real kind of like demonization of natural in order to elevate the synthetics and that monopoly.
Well, when I was a kid, because that was right around, for example, the arrival of penicillin.
Right.
And they started using it for virtually anything. If you had a cut finger that was a little pinky, or you had a sore throat that didn't go away right away, or just about anything, it'd be like, was little Blaine allergic to penicillin yet? Oh, well, we'll give him some more. They were handing it out like candy.
Amazing. You know?
Yeah. And that's what I mean about a lot of the old ways were forgotten.
Yeah, and it's so important to because it's needed. You know, like we need both, right? In that sense.
I have always believed that.
Yeah.
And it frustrated me when I started studying herbology that I would meet young hippy-dippy herby types that were condemning any aspect of modern medicine.
Right.
You know, that Big Pharma was totally evil and all of that. And no, they got some good stuff there that we need. And then the other way around, if the doctors were condemning us because we were doing things that we had no business doing.
Right.
You know, I didn't realize how dry my throat was this morning. Maybe I'm just dehydrated because I'm not sick.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I don't know if it's just because I'm a Libra, but I have always encouraged people to just put down their swords and recognize that we need both.
Right.
And that attitude, I think, is what has gotten me a lot of open doors by hospital boards, getting in on committees and things like that. And
Yeah.
I look to Susan, gosh, I'm blanking out. My favorite naturopath. We used to often end up on the same committees for something like ADAC or whatever.
Yeah.
And I always would cringe when I realized I'd get to the event and I'd see her there, and she had the same feeling because we both had the same speech.
Right.
And I would always, if she spoke first, I would have to say, well, further to what Dr. So-and-so said, blah, 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 blah. And she'd have to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd have most of the same data in our minds.
Yeah. So it's good. You've been able to, connect with some of the nurses and doctors, and they're learning from you as, they've got their protocols and procedures to follow. But, bringing that in for them.
Well, most standard practice doctors, once they meet me as a patient, it's very common that they keep looking at their watches because they realize how much time I'm saving them.
Right.
Like I typically say, listen, speak to me as if I was one of your peers.
Right.
And if you lose me, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
And that saves a lot of time because, like, the average person doesn't have that much understanding of anatomy and physiology.
Right.
So they either listen to, like, especially with things like cancer, you get people have to drive across town, pay for expensive parking, and listening to people that may as well be speaking Lithuanian or something, and doctors don't have that much time to really tell the whole story.
Right.
So they end up going to somebody like a herbalist to fill in the blanks.
Right.
Which is, it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And there's been several occasions where that's come up, where a whole session with me, I remember running into, he was one of the people at the real estate board that I used to answer to. I was their photographer for years.
Great.
And I ran into Gordon, I think it was, at Staples or someplace like that. And he said, "How are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, well, I'm seeing this naturopath now, and I'm ending up quite a bit lighter." And I said, "You mean you're losing weight?" And he said, "No, my wallet." Because every time I go in, it's $90 or something. And I don't quite understand what I'm doing. And so it's unfortunate that they'd end up seeing me. And in that case, I just said right away, I said, "Well, what are you dealing with?" And he had some kidney issues going on.
Right.
And she had started him just on parsley. And I said, "Well, that's because we don't want to go too quickly with weak kidneys.
Right.
And parsley is going to really help. It's not going to whip the kidneys. It's going to slowly build them up to do a better job before you're ready to take any pharmaceuticals."
Right.
Because they're too weak right now. you know.
Yeah.
So why did he have to hear that from me?
Right.
Well, just because
Yeah.
other people have less time,
Yeah. That brings up a point. I got a note from somebody this morning whose sister is quite ill with a kidney infection. And I know we've talked about uva ursi in the past, how it's really good for urinary tract infections. Would the same apply? Would you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you'd look to
The
and while you chat about that in a second, I'll just grab you a little lozenge and maybe we can make that a little...
okay, for my throat?
Yeah.
Thank you. Did you turn it off?
No, keep going.
Oh, okay.
We're talking about kidney
Well,
infection.
Arctostaphylos uva ursi is a very common, we'd call it a dwarf shrub. It is ground cover everywhere in the foothills and mountains. And the common name for it is bearberry. And specific to the leaves in particular, not the berries, there's something called a glycoside called arbutin. And by itself, arbutin isn't that bioactive. But when you cleave it in half, when you break the glycoside apart, you have just created a really powerful antibiotic. And that occurs right in the nephrons of the kidney. Mm-hmm. So you actually are manufacturing an antibiotic in your kidney, and it treats the kidney itself and everything downstream.
Right, okay.
So that's why it's so good for bladder infections, but it treats the kidney itself as well.
Okay, cool.
It's made on site. How perfect is that? It wasn't made in a lab in Toronto or Wuhan. It's made in your own kidney.
Yeah, that's amazing. And as we talked about last week, because we got into a conversation about gout, and we were on that theme of like everything you need is around you, right? And you had given that example. If you walk from Calgary to Whistler, you'll never be out of sight of uva ursi. It's like the lawn, it's just a carpet of that and juniper and other things. So amazing. It's always right around you, Matt. That's good. So I did recommend that, but I just wanted to confirm with you that, because obviously I'd heard about it for, urinary tract.
And it's not one of the ththings that's fussy to prepare.
Yeah.
It's a decoction.
Right.
So you could go out anywhere in the near foothills and fill a 5-gallon pail with that plant, or a whole pickup truck bed for that matter, and nobody would really care.
Yeah.
And you need to boil it because it's a decoction, not an infusion.
Yeah.
So that means you need to cook it longer. Decoctions are usually leathery leaves and barks and roots, where you've got heavy tissue. Mm-hmm. Something like, anything with volatile oils, like you take something like, let's go lemon balm. If you're having a stressful day and you're growing some melissa or lemon balm in your garden, you can just walk up to the plant and go like this, and you get this cloud of oils. Yeah. And your blood pressure drops, and you can just look at the plant and say, "Thank you so much, dear." Where if you go to make tea with it, you've got to be careful it's not too hot, or all of these little volatile, they're just going to fly away.
Yeah.
Right?
One thing that totally amazes me, and I love being a practitioner of herbal medicine for myself, and especially making it, is the absolute diversity of, forms of delivery, forms of preparation. Even just taking one plant, like lemon balm or, whatever, like there's so many different ways to prepare it, and there's considerations in each preparation, which will influence the uses. We've talked about hydrosol already. I just gave you a herbal lozenge, another kind of form. So that one there, have you ever seen those? That's Vogel, Santa Pacina, the spruce.
I noticed the logo as soon as you gave it to me.
Yeah, and gosh, they're delicious. A little bit of mint, and that actually was one of the things that inspired me to create a little syrup that I did recently. I ended up adding rosemary, spruce, mint, and pine together. And lion's mane, actually, I put in there as well. And it's, even though it's like a liquid, it's almost like an instant drop, lozenge in that way. So yeah, different forms of herbal medicine. Most people are obviously familiar with teas. Then they might get into tinctures, and then they might learn about like the topical oils and salves, and maybe they venture, into hydrosols. But there's a few that are maybe not as common as they were before, or maybe some of them have become so socially unacceptable. And I'm thinking about like smoking of herbs, not only in terms of, smoke direct inhalation. I think that really like trips people's brains up of like, what? Like we associate like any inhalation of smoke as like,
yes,
like don't do it. It is so bad for you. But this was one of kind of the olden forms of,
a lot of things when we look to indigenous people's smoking of things, it seldom meant, sometimes did, that they put it in a pipe and smoked it. Most often it was a smudge.
Right.
So we've got, and when the white people came, we might have this young girl with extreme bronchitis, and she's coughing her lungs out. And some of the indigenous people, they didn't have, well, not until they bought them from us, they didn't have blankets, but they would take a light deer skin or something and take a bunch of coals from a fire, and they might put something like dried chokecherry bark on the coals and put the blanket over her.
Yeah.
And this looked really weird. Like, what are they doing to my daughter here? They're going to smoke her. Like, it just seemed too awkward and evil, strange. But it worked. And it was quite a while before we realized that the inner bark from chokecherries has hydrocyanic acid, which is not like, it actually is a narcotic. So when you smudge it and inhale the smoke, it sedates all of the bronchial nerves.
Yeah.
And even if it was whooping cough, it stopped. And that's what led people to, they didn't want to smoke it all the time, so they thought, well, maybe we could make a decoction from the bark.
Right.
But it tasted horrible. All right? So they thought, well, we'll sweeten it with some honey.
Yeah.
And that was the start of wild cherry cough drops. So when you look at something like Vicks wild cherry cough drops, and there's a little cherry there, that's not a Bing cherry. That's a choke cherry.
Yeah.
And the real action is in the inner bark.
Right.
So where you were a few minutes ago, quite often from a single plant, we might make one remedy from the root or the root bark, something else from the leaves, something else just from the flowers.
Right.
It's a whole shopping market of different uses just from one species.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this for a while, kind of like the smoking, again, as you said, more kind of atmospherically, aromatically versus inhalation, but both of them have kind of fallen out of favor. Snorting is another one that's kind of fallen out of favor. And the most maybe recent notable, and I'm not going to mention cocaine because I wouldn't consider that a natural herb, but we'll talk about another delivery system of coca leaf or method of of extraction, but like snuff in the case of tobacco and that type of thing. And I know quite a few people that have gotten into what's called a râpé, which the practice from South America. So it's not only like finely powdered tobacco, but they'll mix other herbs with it, and they basically like shoot it up the nose. I mean, so talk about a delivery system, just like boom, straight to the brain.
Right.
Yeah. And that's fallen out of favor, hasn't it, too? Snuffing. Chewing is another one. So obviously tobacco is a good example where people are like, yeah, of course. People, used to, some still do, chew tobacco. A different method of delivery system, extraction. Coca, source of cocaine, maybe most famous for chewing. Even though you can make a tea with it, it's actually far, far, far more potent.
Now, that was used for high elevation.
Yeah, right? Totally.
You're climbing in the mountains.
Yeah.
Low oxygen levels, and you chew.
Yeah.
I remember one friend coming back from a trip there, and he'd woven a hat.
Right.
And coming through customs, he just wore it.
Right.
Rather than declare anything, and he just thought, well, if the plane's late and I'm getting stressful, I'm just going to chew my hat.
No way. So he wove it out of coca leaves or something. Yeah.
And just wore it right through.
Yeah. Well, I've got a story about crossing borders with coca leaves where we didn't declare it, but it was discovered because we were declaring something else. Because how in those forms it tells you to fill out this, that, and the next, and there's one box, for wood or wood products, and we were bringing back Palo Santo, which is a wood, beautiful, can be burned as incense, aromatically, incredible properties. And my wife Laura was like, wow, we should really, we got all this Palo Santo. Like there was a lot because we were in Ecuador on the coast, dry coastal rainforest where it's indigenous too. And we connected with this man called the Maestro, who's Italian, that had been there for several decades actually. He was visiting the country. I can't remember what decade it was, but there was some sort of like national crisis, like lockdown of the whole country, and he was like basically stranded in this little coastal town for a couple of weeks, but really got quite to like the place and ended up living there, developed a connection with the Palo Santo, of which he was seeing it, becoming endangered because of deforestation, and then also a loss of the cultural appreciation by, the indigenous people there, indigenous as well as just kind of modern Ecuadorians.
Thinking that we had something better than they did.
Right? Yeah. And so he's, basically devoted his whole life to this plant. And so we met him and, got to, be in the forest. He had a whole distillation set up he was making essential oils, that kind of thing. Yep. And, how most Ecuadorians use the Palo Santo is just as insect repellent. Like they're burning like giant chunks of the stuff just to kind of like, like a DEET smoke kind of a thing to detract. So, very cheap. We brought a whole bunch of it, and Laura was all very concerned. Well, it is wood, we should check that box. And I was like, I wouldn't, but she did. So sure enough, we go through the border and, like, oh, what's this wood products? Oh yeah, it's just incense. Well, we'll need to take a look at it. So just go over in that room there, and we did, and open up suitcases. And this one woman, she was just on a power trip. She's like, she found this box of coca tea, something you can buy on Amazon.com, right? Like, 100 tea bags in the box. Oh, this is potent stuff, she says, and technically, coca tea is a class 1 narcotic, the same as cocaine and heroin, but, as a substance, it couldn't be further from the truth, it's not. But technically, legally, it was, and she went on a whole power trip because we had 100 bags of coca tea, class 1 narcotic, and that was a whole fiasco. She was kind. We got. It's
not refined. It's bulk herb.
Right, exactly. So, anyways, we ended up, as much as the power trip she was on, she's like, well, I'm gonna be nice. I'm not gonna give you a criminal record. I'm gonna give you a civil record, because we literally should have been, in handcuffs on the phone to a lawyer going, what am I looking at here? How many years? But we had a civil record for 7 years, and literally every time we went through an airport afterwards, it was
gosh.
like, yeah, you guys over there, narcotic smugglers. And eventually, finally, that wore off, but it was a bit of a pain for a while. And
So you wouldn't have wanted to been bringing any ayahuasca during that time.
no, yeah, that she probably wouldn't have seen, known, recognized the fact that it was this big, large orange commercial box that said coca leaf on it, and so I know all about bringing those things back.
I had a fellow. It was interesting. I'm just working on the notes now for the upcoming alternative first aid class that I'm going to be doing.
Yeah,
And I just last night was mentioning how one of the first things you'll find in a glove box in my vehicles, or on the top of any of my first aid kits, or in my camera bag, or pretty much anywhere, is some good quality cayenne,
right.
A film canister full. And then I kind of paused because nobody shoots film anymore,
Right.
for the most part. So just find something that size.
Yeah.
And if I've cut myself badly, the first thing that I want to do is take pretty much a whole teaspoon of good quality cayenne and add some just room temperature tepid water and stir it up and down the hatch.
Yeah.
And then rinse the glass with a little more water and use that to rinse my mouth. So anyway, and I love the taste of it, and I put it on just about everything I eat. So I was coming back from a business trip and going through customs. This guy he just had this, he knew he was going to get me. He was obsessed.
Right.
He knew somehow from my energy that I was doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And he was going through everything, and I had my camera bags. We used to get green cards, they were called, where you pre-register all of your camera information with the serial numbers and everything, so that
Oh, really?
so that they know you didn't buy them while you were on your trip. You see,
okay.
it was a duty thing.
Right.
And he started going through the cameras, and I said, "There's green cards in the back of me." He said, "Well, no." And he'd gone through my shaving kit and all of that. And there's a sack of film. So he's taking each one and shaking it. Sounds like a can of film.
Right.
Opens it. Oh, what a surprise. It's a can of film.
Yeah.
And he went through about 20 rolls of film, and he picked one up that,
Oh.
this isn't film. And he opened it up, and he was just so proud of himself because it had this red powder in it.
Gotcha.
And I don't know of any illicit substance that's red. I don't think there's anything out there that's red.
Yeah.
But I went to grab his arm, maybe, but he was being such a butthead that I thought, no, I'm just going to watch this. And he lifted it to his nose and went,
Whoa.
and he just froze.
Yeah.
And I started going into my whole spiel about capsicum, and it's really high in vitamins, and it stops bleeding in 20 seconds. And he was just, he'd snorted it so deeply that it had gone through the nasopalatal canals, I guess, and there was red tears coming out, dripping all over his white short sleeve shirt.
Yeah.
And he was just pushing all of my gear away on the just get out of here. Just go, I don't care, go. And
Yeah.
I just thought, buddy, you had that coming, because
For sure.
he was just treating me like,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be that way, but some people get a badge,
Yeah.
and it changes their whole personality,
No, totally. And
So I just packed up all my stuff. But as soon as I went through that swinging door, I had to do my best impression of a Burt Reynolds laugh. Like as soon as I got, I can't do it right now because of my throat. But I just did this big cackle.
Right. Yeah.
Buddy, you had that coming.
Yeah. Totally. Instant karma. There.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, like you say, people they get a badge, but also those who have that type of personality are drawn to those types of careers because they get the badge and they are able
I suppose.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So that first aid course, we got that coming up in April. Of course, that's going to be a great day, nice deep dive into,
And I am, sorry,
You're into
No, I got-
that center part, hey, where it's beginning to.
but I think it's working.
Nice.
I'm just trying to get it to a different part in my mouth so I can talk. I think I'm getting carried away with the notes that I'm writing.
Right.
I'm writing
It's turning into a book.
freaking book.
Yeah.
But I could cover that ground for a whole weekend, but I've only got, I think, 4 or 5 hours, right?
Yeah, five.
So we got 5 now. So I'm thinking it's okay if I get carried away with the notes. So the students that are there, there'll be stories I forget and or don't have time to cover or whatever, so I've got them in there.
Yeah.
I had one, it's a moment in time that I haven't thought of for, that has to be 30 years ago, maybe more.
Right.
An old friend named Harold Finkelman had arranged for me to do a couple of week-long stints at the Jewish summer camp that's up at, I forget what the lake is. I know the camp's called B'nai B'rith, I think. But, and it was opened the same year I was, 1955. And the committee was a bit concerned because they'd never hired anybody to teach their children who wasn't of the faith. And he kept saying, but Blaine's different. It's going to be okay. It's going to work really well. So there I was with all of these little Jewish kids from all over the country. They were there for a week's stay. And some of them who I think their parents maybe could afford it and just wanted a longer holiday away from their kids would pay for 2 weeks.
Right.
There was a few that were there that long. But, and I wasn't sure how it was going to go because I'd never taught children before.
Right.
I thought, I usually teach people that made a decision to be here and spend their hard-earned money, blah, blah, blah. So I was surprised that everything was going exceedingly well. At any rate, the older kids got to do a 3 or 4 day long float. They weren't really even paddling down the Red Deer River, which came nearby the camp somehow. And the younger kids probably for liability reasons couldn't leave camp. So their big get out of camp thing was to spend a night out under the stars with Blaine, the barefoot herb walker man.
Yeah.
And so we're heading out, and the kids had to get their own bedrolls together and everything. And it's late afternoon, early evening. And this one boy just got all freaked out because he got a nosebleed. And I said, well, Isaac, look, right here, it's like I said, whenever you need something, Creator just provides us with, and look, what's right here is yarrow. And people all over the world use this to stop bleeding. So he said, no. I'm a bleeder. He didn't know the word hemophiliac, but he said, I'm a bleeder, and I have to get to a hospital right away, and they burn my nose. Cauterizing, like he didn't have the lingo. But he was freaked. And I said, well, just let's just relax, and we're not that far from the office. Let's just give this a try. So he was so nervous. He wanted to believe, but he was so nervous. He crammed like half a handful of yarrow leaves up his nose.
Yeah.
And so it was just, he was stretching his nostrils like crazy, and it was irritating. He said, well, it's hurting. And he was all fussing. And I said, well, I'd leave it a little longer. I didn't want it not to work, so I encouraged him to leave it in a little bit longer. But he was saying he couldn't take the pressure in his sinuses or whatever he'd done. And it was that time of late day where the sun's rays are coming in at a nice, almost horizontal angle.
Yeah.
Coming in. And he started pulling this, he was two-fisting this clot.
Wow.
He had about a 2 foot long, it was the color of cherry jelly, just this brilliant bright red clot out of his face. And one of the little girls just puked. Oh, no. It was just too much for her. And I said, well, Margie, that's so, I said, we're good? And he said, yeah, I think that worked. Is that why they're called cough drops? Because they make you cough. Anyway.
You're making me cough now.
It's like dogs yawning.
Yeah.
Dog yawns, you yawn, vice versa.
Yeah.
So I said, Margie, look what's right here is wild mint. And Creator's still with us. So let's camp right here tonight, and we can get some water boiling and make some peppermint tea to settle your stomach.
Right. Yeah.
And there was about 30 or 40 kids, and they were all just kind of wowed by this, but that's what we did. And so, so we got the blood clot we needed, and we got the tummy settled.
Yeah.
But I haven't remembered that for all these years, and I can still see just the brilliant red of this 2-foot-long clot.
Wow.
So I have to fit that story in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
But
so we were talking about wild foraging before we started. Here we are, spring. I know we've recently had some more snow and some more cold, but we're coming up on the equinox. What kind of things would you be harvesting this time of year?
well, sorry, I think that about worked. This time of year, I like to pick stuff that you don't have to pick this time of year, but it's just that the rest of the year there's other stuff to pick, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So stuff like uva ursi,
Right.
for example.
Yeah.
And what I would do if you have time to pick a whole bunch, just in case you get a bladder infection, what I like to do with decoctions is just get some mason jars out if you're going to make a big batch, and because you can cook it up and wash your jars really well. I used to just run them through the dishwasher because dishwashers have, I think there's bleach in the dishwasher soap, isn't there? So I took that to be really clean, and I would do that just before I needed them, so they were still hot coming out of the dishwasher.
Right.
And you've got all of this decoction, and you fill the mason jar till it's about that far from the lid, and get the lid on, and then it seals itself as it cools.
Right.
So it's vacuum packed.
Yeah.
And it's good for years.
No way.
Just, put it in a box in the basement somewhere.
Yeah.
And then, but if you're just going to make a little batch, decoctions will live for a few weeks in the fridge, I think.
Right.
And, but anyway, or you could just leave it dry.
Yeah.
Things like uva ursi are all virtually dry anyway. You don't have to use a dehydrator or anything like that because they're these leathery leaves. And I would go as far as just leaving them in an open box lid or something for a few days just to air off.
Yeah.
And then you could just keep them in a jar dried for immediate use.
Yeah.
But still on the kidney talk, juniper berries as well.
Right.
Juniper is a dioecious, that's spelled dioecious shrub, which means that it's one sex or the other.
Right.
So if you've got a whole hillside covered with juniper plants and you can't find any berries, the birds probably didn't eat them. You're in a gay club.
Right.
It's just you got a whole hillside covered with males.
Yeah.
And the male plants produce a pollen that gets to the girls, and they produce the berries. And the first year we get these mostly greenish, a little bit gray by summer's end berry.
Yeah.
And they would work, but we like to let them oxidize for, depending on how you look at this, it's 2 years or 3 seasons, or 3 years or 2 seasons, one way or the other, because it takes a couple of years for them to fully ripen to a nice deep dark blue.
Yeah.
And they taste better and work better in that phase. So it's one of the things that Juniperus communis, it's the most common one, is very prickly. And you're either going to pick very carefully. This time of year, I like days when it's no wind, and for juniper, it doesn't matter so much about the sun, but just a calm day that's no colder than about maybe 6 degrees, and you can work with bare hands for a couple hours without getting all frozen up.
Yeah.
And again, they're not like blueberries. You don't need to dehydrate them, but they are full of some moisture this time of year. So if you just put them in a jar, they might go moldy.
Right.
I would just leave them in a bowl somewhere for a couple of weeks, and let them air dry. And again, I'm only picking, it's not the right time of year, it's just something to do at this time of year.
Right.
You know, in the summer, we've got all this other stuff to pick, right?
Yeah, totally.
So, real thin leather gloves maybe, or just bare hands. And another thing that we've talked about elsewhere, I think, is Populus balsamiferus, balsam poplar. Any of our deciduous leaves, if you look at a leaf, it takes a lot of engineering to build a leaf. And if our deciduous trees, like maple trees and Saskatoon bushes and rose, even rose bushes and whatnot, if they just started making their leaves this spring, they wouldn't have time by fall. So next year's leaves actually grew last summer.
Right, yeah.
But they're just in a bud phase.
Yeah.
And to protect, as winter comes, to protect the babies from our harsh, dry, cold Alberta air, they generate a shellac or rosiny coating, and some of those are medicinal. So in the case of Populus balsamifera, or balsam poplar, or the mature trees crack and the bark turns black at the bottom. On a rainy day, they literally look black bark, hence the name. They have this reddish colored rosin on them, and once it's there, on a warm day in really full-on sun, the rosin might even start to melt a little bit and drip to the tip of the buds.
Yeah.
And you find them like that. And so on a warm enough spring day, you can pick them, but they're so sticky,
Yeah.
it's hard to get them in the bag, right?
Yeah.
So I that's why I like days that are around 4 to 6 degrees, no wind, just so you can work bare hands. And if you know you're going out to pick balsam buds, I would take some, cheapest thing to take would be rubbing alcohol.
Right.
Just so you can clean your fingers when you're done. Otherwise, I'm worried about maybe ruining the fission on the finish on a leather steering wheel.
Right.
You got all this gooey stuff on your fingers.
Yeah.
So clean them with alcohol. In a pinch, I've always got first aid kits with me, and I would use something like tea tree oil or whatever that would work.
Yeah.
But cheaper to use rubbing alcohol. So, and if you get home and you don't have time to keep working on this project, just throw them in the freezer, and they can stay there for 2 years if you want, and the buds will just kind of go. Remember that winter that lasted all the way from remember that, what a long winter that was. 2020, man, all the way to 2022. But it doesn't matter. So at some point later, the way I like to do it is to put a double boiler of any nature would work, but then you got all this rosiny goo.
Yeah.
And I like to usually just dedicate a jar, and I might use it for more than one batch.
Yeah.
So fill a jar with the buds, and a proper ratio is 2 or 3 to 1. So typically, if you kind of fill a jar at least a third full, and then when you add I use organic olive oil. When you add the oil, just visually, there'll be the buds and then the oil.
Right.
And then we put that jar in an appropriately sized pot. And if you don't have a trivet that fits to protect the glass from the heat, depending on how thick the bottom on your pot is, you can just use a cloth too, like a face cloth or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And just so you don't shock the glass.
Yeah.
And I typically, you don't want to deep fry them. I typically bring the water up to where it's just about going to boil, and then cut the heat back, and just let them sit there warming in that oil all afternoon.
Yeah.
And then if you're going to use it right away, you just have to strain them off. And again, if you're going to use a tea strainer, you're going to have all this rosin on them, so you might need a brush with some alcohol. Do you do it different? That's how I do it.
Yeah, basically, yeah, same.
And you can use that oil just as it is. Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of methyl salicylates in it and benzoic acid. So it smells very vanilla-ish, very beautiful smell.
Yeah.
And you could use it straight up just as the oil. Or what we typically do is mix it. I usually go about 2 to 1 with beeswax.
Yeah.
And then when it cools, you've got a really nice salve. And the story goes that we had a bunch of people that had sort of been thrown out of their campground, let's say, and they had to walk far and long and barefoot or in sandals, and people were getting blisters and sprained ankles, and they were, their feet and ankles were a mess. And before it was time to make camp, I don't think everybody heard it, but Moses was there.
Right.
And Moses heard this voice say, Moses. Is that you, Lord? Moses, take some of the women up into this hillside. Really, Lord? Not like that, Moses. Take some of the women with you to pick the bark and buds off these trees and simmer them in the olive oil on the fires tonight. And you don't have jars that will spill. You have beeswax with you, so make it into an ointment. Anyway, they're still fighting over there, and that goes back a few thousand years.
Yeah.
And it was the Gilead Mountains, they're called, that they were passing through. You can look that up on a map. And so we call it balm of Gilead. Mm-hmm. And that can be used on virtually any sort of a sprain, or just a sore shoulder, or just for a back rub.
Yeah.
It's very warming and soothing and calming.
Yeah.
So that's one I'll mention in the class, because in the winter, although it's going to mess up your teeth, you could take some of those buds and just chew them enough, or just even warm fingers enough, to just get the rosin off the buds,
Yeah.
to rub on something like a sprained ankle.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember in Terry's book, he talks about cutting himself with a knife because he's cutting an apple in his hand or whatever, and it goes right through, and he just walks out and grabs some poplar buds and deals with the cut that way.
Yeah, so it's a winter remedy that, well, it's there all year, really, but we usually pick it in the winter because it's just, like I said, it's there and it's something to do in the winter.
Yeah.
But very pain relieving and astringent is why it would help on a cut.
Right.
And we have, this is something I'll be bringing up in the class, we have quite a few plants in Alberta that are the original sources of aspirin. So carbon atoms, like their fellow carbon atoms, and there's a whole lot of ways. There's this saying that organic chemistry is often called carbon chemistry, because almost everything of interest to us are carbon backbones,
right,
that then they get accessorized, right? So carbon can form long chains, which are called aliphatic, or circular structures, which we call cyclic. And so we have all sorts of different compounds. You can think of just hydrogen and carbon, hydrocarbons. So we live in a hydrocarbon world. We're in Calgary. So we have all of our petrified forests that are making things like fuel for us, and any of the things that are, not all of, but most of the things we call essential oils are carbon backbones like that. So there's different ways, like isoprene units. CH3, I think, is propane. CH4 is butane.
Right.
A lot of our fuels, octane is 8 carbons holding hands in all of these different shapes. And then they get accessorized, like I say, with other things like nitrogen. Then we've got proteins and. But where did I get sidetracked?
Talking about all the different forms like of aspirin, essentially.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have a genus of plants called willows. And the Latin name, I think we have 46 species in Alberta. And the Latin name for the whole genus is Salix. And the acid that forms there is that's where I side right, it forms a cyclic structure. So we have a cyclic structure that comes from salix, and so we end up with cyclic acid.
Right.
And our early pioneers, settlers, explorers were watching sometimes what the indigenous people were doing, like they'd been canoeing all day and they're doing a portage, and one of them slips on a mossy rock, and he's taking, red willow is there, and he's taking strips of bark and pulling it off in long strands and chewing them and tying them around his ankle. And everybody watching this is sort of going, well, what's this guy doing, beaver impressions, or what's going on here?
Yeah.
And later in the day, they see him doing this again because he's been paddling all day, and he's chewing the bark and just taking the chewed bark and rubbing his sore shoulder with it. And this just looks too weird, like is this voodoo or what's this guy doing? Mm-hmm. But, well, it's worth trying. And they realized this worked. So when we leave K country behind us and head eastward, you got a big walk until you get to the east coast, and then an equally long swim, and you end up in the foothills of the Alps, which look almost identical to Kananaskis country.
Right.
I didn't know that until I got to France.
Right.
And other than walnuts and olives and things in the forest, because their winters are milder,
Yeah.
it's the same forest.
Right. Amazing.
Right? So Dr. Bayer, this little German physicist, got a hold of this willow bark, and there's another little, it's called a dwarf shrub, called meadowsweet. We use it a lot for stomach disorders. And that was the one that he studied in specific to come up with the extracts that he wound up making the acetyl form in a lab. So we have acetyl salicylic acid,
Right.
aspirin.
Yeah.
So rather than chewing bark anymore, we got these little white pills that are now used all over the world.
Yeah.
And so we have meadowsweet and willow bark and balsam poplar.
Right.
And these are all very easy to identify, grow almost everywhere, plants that give us wild aspirin, basically.
And then, is there a connection between aspen and aspirin? Do you think the names, there was any inspiration there?
I've never gone there in my head.
No. Okay.
The trembling aspen doesn't have as much of that rosin.
Right.
We tend to use the inner bark of that tree more,
Yeah.
and it's used very much like goldenseal,
Right.
which grows wild in eastern Canada, but not here,
Right.
unless you plant it. So a lot of the, especially lung and female remedies, anywhere we had tubes with mucus coatings and that sort of thing, goldenseal was often used. And aspen inner bark can be used the same way as goldenseal. Anyway, they're
Right.
quite interchangeable.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was a good chat. I hope you learned some things. Hope you enjoyed
We
that.
drifted around a little.
Oh, yeah. I covered some good ground. All right. Well, be sure to hit the like button and share it out, and post any comments, any questions down below. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll be back next week with another chat. Until then.
That's all, folks.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to give us a like, share this with someone you know who would benefit, and subscribe so you're up to date with all the new episodes coming out.
You can shop online at lightcellar.ca as well as visit us in the heart of Bowness in Calgary, Alberta.